Thank you for joining us for today's Mobility Series webcast, Windows Phone 7 for Developers, presented by Robert Altland. My name is Maris Mead, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for Neudesic and the moderator for today's webcast. This webcast is presented by Robert Altland, Neudesic's Principal Consultant. We are very excited to have him present for us this morning. Today's webcast is a part of our Mobility Series. We'll be hosting our next webcast, Windows Phone 7 and Your Business, on November 30th. We'll be sending out more information about this webcast along with today's webcast recording. If you are all logged on, you should be able to see the title for that states Windows Phone 7 Development. There was a brief intro earlier regarding features within Live Meeting. To briefly recap, we encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by typing them in. To ask your question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. Please note all questions will be held until the end. We will also be using the theme chart feature within Live Meeting. Changing your feedback color within this tool provides feedback to the presenter. To provide feedback, click on the feedback menu found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Select your feedback color. Your seat in the conference center will display your selected color. Lastly, this webcast is being recorded and will be available via the Neudesic website. We will email you when the link is available. If everyone is ready, please make sure your seat color is green. At this time, I'd like to turn our presentation over to Robert.
Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Windows Phone 7 development and what you as a developer need to know to get started. This is the agenda. These are the topics that I'm going to be trying to cover today in an hour. There's a lot there. I could do nothing but slides for the whole session, but I tried to work some demos in for you so that it can help it to sink in. So we'll start with an overview and then walk through each of these things, kind of starting with general, what makes an application, how's it put together, how do you maintain managed state, how do you navigate across pages, consume web services, use push notifications, implement a try before you buy model, use sensors and device features and application system applications. So first off, the Metro styling is something that differentiates Windows Phone 7 from other platforms. And you notice there's, from these screenshots on this slide, there's no dimension. Focused on typography, the content is king, and the direction is to provide interaction, transitions, provide animations that bring your content to life rather than doing glass buttons and drop shadows and dimension that way. Use transitions to create dimension. So that Metro styling is kind of throughout your application and provided for you as a starting point with the boilerplate code that we'll see in the Hello World example that I'll be doing first. Kind of puts you on the path, and then from there you can continue it. So as a developer, how can you be sure that the application that you're building is going to run on devices that run the Windows Phone 7 operating system? And the answer to that is that Microsoft has put together a set of specs that any device that's going to run the OS needs to adhere to so that you get a consistent user experience with your application across all devices that are running the OS. So that includes things like memory and processor speed and some access to some device features like the camera and the sensors, as well as hardware buttons, the back, the start button, and the search button. So this lets the user navigate through your application and through the system. One of the nice things for you developing applications is that there's not an entirely new language, an entirely new framework really to learn. There's just kind of a modification to the Silverlight framework if you're building Windows Phone 7 applications using Silverlight, which is what we're talking about today. So it's a XAML-based application like Windows Presentation Foundation and Silverlight. So if you're familiar with doing layout and using the dependency property system and data binding syntax that you have with those other technologies, you'll be right at home with developing Windows 7 applications. Oh, and to get started, what you'll need to do is go to the marketplace and register, and this lets you hook up your Windows Phone 7 devices as development devices. The developer unlock them so that you can do testing of your application, as well as being able to submit applications to the marketplace so that other users can get them and download them. This does cost $99. Good news is, though, in addition to that, the tools are free. So download and install the tools. You don't need Visual Studio. It comes with an express version of Visual Studio, so the tools are completely free. And then once you're done developing your app, you submit it to the marketplace. This goes through a similar validation process as some other platforms. Microsoft runs some tests to make sure that your application is behaving responsibly, is not crashing, responds consistently to user interaction, is keeping the user's privacy preferences, adhering to those, and as well as other things. So the framework, you build a Windows Phone 7 application either using Silverlight or XNA. You can build a mobile-friendly website using HTML and JavaScript. We're going to be talking mostly about, all about Windows Phone 7 for Silverlight today. XNA is the framework that you would use if you're building more of a game and want more control over drawing and things like that. And everything in this, not everything in this model, but a lot of what's in this diagram here we'll be talking about throughout this session. So the first thing in kind of setting the stage for Windows Phone 7 applications is kind of understanding how the application is put together, what the pieces and parts are, and what the architecture is. And you can sort of think of a Windows Phone 7 application in the same way or similarly to the way that you think about a Silverlight navigation application or a WPF navigation application. In that you have a frame and you give that frame a URI to content or pages within your application, and that frame displays those pages. So we have that same frame metaphor. We have the same unit of deployment with the Windows Phone 7 app as you do with Silverlight, a ZAP, and that ZAP is what you submit to the marketplace for certification and what's used to run the phone. The application model is similar, and we'll talk about that next. The frame itself is a little bit more inherent in a Windows Phone 7 app than it is in a Silverlight navigation app, meaning that that frame is there and some of its interaction is handled for you by the system instead of having a frame as part of the rest of the layout of your page. You have, similar to a web browser with a navigation journal, you have a backstack in Windows Phone 7 that includes the pages in your application, so the user can drill through your app and then use the device back button to back up a page at a time, and then eventually exit your app and back into other things that they were using before they were using your application. So let's see what, with the tools installed, what it means to create a new Windows Phone 7 app and run it. Now I need to share my desktop. Okay, so we've installed the tools. We've got Visual Studio installed and running, and I'm going to create a new project. And with the tools installed, you'll see we have a new group, Silverlight for Windows Phone. And inside there's a couple of different project templates, all except the class library just provide you with different boilerplate code for your application. So there's the basic page, there's a list that's meant to present data, and then there's these two new project templates that were released with the RTM, the Panorama application and the Pivot application. So let's just show some of that alive in motion that I was referring to with the Metro styling by creating a new Windows Phone Panorama application. So when we do that, we see we have our design surface. We can interact with our design surface. We see the XAML here. So if you're a WPF or Silverlight developer or have experience with those technologies, this will look very familiar to you. The root visual is a phone application page, and then there's some controls that are created for you to give you a starting point. And in the case of the Panorama application, so we have our layout root, and then we have this Panorama control. And I'll show you this when it's running in a moment. Some other things, let's take a look at the structure of the project. We have our application class, which is our entry point, similar to Silverlight that way, and our main page, which is, you can think of it as your root visual. and that's what we're looking at right now. So let's have a quick look at the application class. The structure of it's a little bit different, so you do still have application resources like you do with Silverlight, and then you have these application lifetime objects, services, and those are ways for you to customize things that are available to you throughout the running of the application. And the code behind, when you create a panorama project, it hooks up a baseline implementation of the model view model design pattern, MVVM, creates a main view model and gives you access to that as a static property on your application class. That's all boilerplate code, and if you want to continue to implement MVVM, it's up to you, and there's no structure that's really provided for that. So we've got a few events that we're going to be talking about in a minute. We also have this root frame. So notice the frame is part of the application class. It's not an element that is on your main page. And this is the frame that all visuals, all pages within your application are going to be loaded into. And this is also the frame then that navigation events and the navigation service communicates with. So if we run this, make sure you've got Windows Phone 7 emulator set up. Part of the tools that get installed is an emulator so that you can run your application and it doesn't require a real device to plug into. So by default, we load up the main page, and you can see sometimes this animation doesn't come across in a live meeting, but if I scroll slowly enough, you can see that the list and the title and the background are all scrolling at different speeds, and that the presentation area is larger than the phone frame, which lets the user, gives the user the impression that they can kind of dig around within the page and discover other aspects that are other controls that are outside of the frame. So that's a quick hello world run around the Windows Phone 7 application. Let's go back to the slides. So let's start talking about the structure of a Windows Phone 7 application. One of the controls that gives a consistent presentation to the user across not only your application but system applications and other third-party applications is the application bar. So this is something you can use to provide you can think of it as sort of the main menu for your application. This is a way for you to provide the navigation structure of your phone app so that the user has a way to get around. You can also use the panorama application that we just created in the Hello World example, or maybe the pivot, but really panorama and the application bar are what you want to use. And one thing about the application bar that's different from other controls that you'll use within the application is that this is kind of a control that stands between the system and your application. This is also a control that reinforces the navigation metaphor that's inherent in Windows Phone 7 applications, so that the user, whether they're using your application, other third-party applications, or a system application, they can look for that application bar and know that that's what they can use to get around. So because of that, there's a little bit less control over presentation, and not just of the bar itself, but the items that you can put in the bar. But the upside is that a user can pick up your application if they've used any other ones and know how to get around without any trouble. So one of the most basic pieces of advice that I can give to people starting off on Windows Phone 7 application development is, sounds simple, sounds maybe too basic, but it is really something to keep in the back of your mind all the time. The application that you're creating will be running on somebody's phone. They might not be connected. The processor speed is slower, the memory is less, and the application will get interrupted. So the Windows Phone 7 OS is not multitasking, so there's one application that's open at a time. So if somebody wants to step out of your application and into another one, your application will be deactivated will be closed. And in addition to that, if they receive a call or a text or something, there are other things as part of the system that can interrupt the application. So from the ground up, from the start, you want to be thinking about how your application will behave when it gets interrupted. So that includes handling state, which, okay, so because of this idea that the application is going to get interrupted, there are a few new events that are on the application class that you haven't seen in Silverlight or WPF, and they are mainly the activating and deactivating event. So when your application gets interrupted, the deactivating event, application deactivating event gets raised and gives you a chance within your application to do things to prepare to be deactivated. And there's a small window of time that you have to be able to run that stuff, so you don't want to be doing a lot of things in there. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to state. When the user returns to your application after a phone call, or if they back into your application, the activating event gets raised. And one of the most common things that you do with these events is to hand off state so that it can be restored. Hand off state on deactivate. Save it so that when the application gets reactivated, you can restore that state. And you can kind of think about this the same way that you think about ASP.NET sessions. When you're in a website and you're going from page to page and you're entering information, that information gets persisted through the duration of the session. But if you leave the website and you come back in later on, you open up a new browser session or whatever, that session state is reset and you're starting from scratch. That's sort of the way that you can think about this. So there's information. In addition to that, there's persistent stuff. There's user preferences and things like that you want to live across application life cycles, across these sessions. So when you're thinking about how your application is going to handle being deactivated, and you're thinking about state in particular, you want to categorize your state into 3 different categories. One is the persistent data that you want to keep across application restarts. Another one is transient data, which is stuff that's happening within the session that you want to be able to restore and recover once the application gets reactivated. And then there's page state. That's sort of like view state in ASP.NET. There's like what control is focused, where the scroll position is on a list box or whatever, to restore the visual presentation of your page back to the way that it was before it was deactivated. And one thing to note about this is something that you want to think about from the beginning, because depending on how you do your development, it might be difficult to come in after the fact and try to implement this. A word that clicks with people with this is a term called tombstoning. So what's basically happening when your application gets deactivated, the phone still hangs on to it because it's still part of the backstack maybe. And if the user hits the device back button, the system needs a way to be able to recover. So the application isn't running, but there's sort of a memento or something hanging around so that the system can restore that. And then, so when your phone gets deactivated, that's sort of known as a tombstoning event. And when you reactivate, you're recovering that tombstone, pulling out the state, and reactivating your application. I mentioned the navigation metaphor and frames, and also that it's a little bit more inherent with Windows Phone 7 than with the Silverlight navigation application. We saw the frame that lives at the application scope, so that's not something that you really control on individual pages. Your pages assume that they're going to be presented within that frame. And similar to a Silverlight navigation application, you've got your navigation service, you give it a URI, and that's a relative URI to the page that you want to load, and you call navigate. And you also have the ability to override these navigation events so that you can do something more when somebody navigates to or from your page. One common thing that you would do with that is to save off the state maybe, the page state maybe. And also the best practice or lessons learned with this is to try not to override that navigation functionality too much, because that's really the user's, that's what the user is grounded in. That's something basic that they learn about using the OS and about using your application, is that navigation metaphor. And you want to make sure that when they use the device back button or when they do a navigation event within your application, that you're meeting their expectations. So you don't want to fight that too much. So let's have a quick look at that. So we're looking at the application lifecycle and state and navigation. So I've taken this demo that we did on the previous, and I've canned it, and I've used that as a starting point for this and added the new code so we can step through it rather than me coding it up while you watch. All right, so start every demo by running it so that you can see what we're talking about, and then we can step into the code. So we have our panorama page, our main page like before. I've modified the list that's created, so I've gone into the view model and I've just put some useful labels here so we understand what each of these is. To illustrate application state, what I've done is I've just added a counter to my view model so that and tied that to a text box so that we can track a loaded count for this page. So if we go back and we reload that page, that counter is going to increment. We can see it's been loaded 2 times. It's been loaded 3 times, right? Now if we step out, if we hit the start button, which is what you'll do in the emulator to simulate an interruption like a phone call, or just the user deciding that they're temporarily done with your application and want to use something else. So you hit the start button. Now I've got a breakpoint set, and you notice that we hit our deactivated event. And this is an example of how you would save off your transient state. So what's provided for you is a string object dictionary off of the current phone application service, property called state. Give it a key, and what I'm doing, and this is where you can save whatever you want, but it's easiest for this example just to take that view model that's been created for us, that one that I've added that loaded count property to, and save that off into the state dictionary. And this is also something that you want to be careful about, because you have, I think it's 10 seconds to complete your deactivation and your reactivation, otherwise your application is in violation. So you don't want to be throwing a lot of stuff in there, and you don't want to be doing a lot of heavy processing within either of these 2 events. So the state, maybe you don't want to save off large object graphs, just also because of the size, but not necessarily the work that needs to be done. So it's best to save off keys or whatever, everything that you need in order to be able to restore state when the application reactivates. So the user's finished their phone call, or they're finished with whatever application that they were just using. Now they hit the device back button to get back to whatever the previous page was that they loaded, which is our state page. So now we can see that the application activated event has been raised. We're handling that and making sure we have an object in there with the key, and then setting that back to our view model so that now when we browse to the application state, we can see that our counter is incremented from 3 to 4 instead of restarting at 1. So if we go back, now we've exited the application. This is also something important to note. With other platforms, like iPhone, for example, when you use an application and you back out of it and then you return to it later on, a lot of applications restore the state to where it was when you used it last. And with Windows Phone 7, you differentiate between leaving the application and suspending the application. So when you back out of an application, the expectation from the user is that you're done using it. When I come back to this later on, I'm going to start fresh. The other part of that expectation is when I get interrupted by a phone call and I go back to that application, it's going to pick up where it left off. So here's our application list. Going to launch Hello World, and when I go back into application state, it's reset to loading 1 time. Okay, second is the application bar. So I've got a page here that has 1 application bar item, and we'll take a look at the code. I've got a menu that does the same thing, and all this is just a button that controls navigation that forwards me to that same page that we got to from the home page. So now the load increment has changed. We know it's the same page. So let's take a quick look at the code for that, which is really stuff that's provided for you kind of by default when you create a new, when you go to Project, Add, New Item, do a portrait page. That's what you get when we look at this. This is what's created. With every one of these, this application bar is commented out. You just uncomment it out, and that gives you a way to use it. So if we take a look at what we have here, we have specific content. So we have the application bar that contains a button and has a collection of menu items. It's not. Notice this isn't a UI element. This isn't a normal button that you use within your application. This is a special application bar icon button that has different properties: icon, URI, text, and then a click handler. And then a collection of menu items that's the same. It has an application bar menu item. These are the only types that are allowed within an application bar. Like I said, there's limited control over the presentation of this because Microsoft wants to ensure that the user has the application meets certain expectations. If you're using an application bar, this is the way that it's going to look. This is what it's going to have in it, and this is what you can do with it. So we can see in our click handler, it's just a plain old event handler. We're just calling navigate. So this gets into the navigation aspect of the demo. So every phone application page has a navigation service. On there are different properties. So if you're on the root page, can go back is going to be false. Otherwise, throughout your application, it's going to be true. So you can check that. You can compare the source that you're navigating to what the current source is. You can go back without having to keep track of yourself where to go, and you got the navigated property. So I'm going to right-click and go to definition just to show you something here. So certain types are allowed within the application bar. So there we see the application bar button doesn't inherit from dependency property, doesn't inherit from button. This is its own class that just implements a few interfaces. So we don't even have access to the dependency property system within this. So that gives you an idea of how different the application bar is from other UI elements that you'll use within your app. So also, let's have a quick look at main page to show you how overriding the navigation methods would work. So in our layout, we have this panorama item that has a couple of different items, and inside each of them is a list box. What I'm doing to handle navigation is I'm hooking into the selection changed event so that when I select the first item in the list, I think it was application state, we'll see from the, based on the index, do different navigation. So first item in the list goes to app state, same navigation service. Now what happens when the user navigates from our main page, from our panorama, to that application state page, and then uses the device back button to reload the panorama page? What happens is the system recognizes this page was already used and pulls up and basically reloads it with the state it was at the state it was in when you left it, which means we selected item 0 in the list. When we return, item 0 is still going to be selected, which isn't going to be cool if they want to go back to the same place. They're going to click on that list box item, that first one in the list. They're not going to go anywhere because technically the selection hasn't changed. So if you're using list boxes for navigation, if you're drilling through some process, some wizard kind of process to do your navigation, one of the things you'll commonly do on navigated to, or maybe even on the way out on navigated from, is to reset the selection on your list box. That way, if the user chooses the same item, selection change still gets raised and they can still, the system still behaves the way that they would expect. So that's a quick review of application state, some of the structure of the app, like the page and the frame, and navigation. Let's go back to slides. Okay, so you're not going to get very far along in building your application before you're going to want to use present some data, and that means just like with Silverlight, the model for Windows Phone 7, getting data is the same. So you've got web services that you can call, and those service calls are asynchronous. So when you're thinking about consuming web services within Windows Phone, think Silverlight. It's almost the same thing. It's just what's supported is a little bit of a subset. So you can consume services or make calls using HTTP web request and response and the web client. You can call ASMX services and WCF services with basic HTTP binding. You don't need a cross-domain policy file, which is cool, so you can call third-party services however you want. You don't have to figure out how to let them grant you access and all of that. And some things aren't supported that don't make sense, like it probably doesn't make sense for you to try to use sockets within a Windows Phone 7 application. And there are some things that maybe should be available that aren't quite yet, that probably will be, like RIA services and TLM authentication. Another thing to keep in mind is that more than on a laptop or a desktop within the browser, i.e. Silverlight, Windows Phone 7 applications need to be more aware of what the status of the network is. So you have the same sort of API that you have with Silverlight, where you can detect when the network connectivity has changed, and in addition to that, also what the connection type is. So is it connected through Wi-Fi, or is it connected through GSM, or is it not connected at all? So what you'll typically do is you'll first, when your page is ready to make a web service call to get the data, you'll do a check to make sure that you have access to it. And depending on what you're doing, you might want to do a check to see what the connection type is, to make sure if you're going to be pulling down a lot of data, make sure that the connection that you have will support that and give a consistent, reliable user experience without too much waiting. And then you'll actually make the call. And again, so that if you're adding a service reference to a regular web service or a WCF web service, that means hooking up the completed event and calling the async version of the web method, which we'll see in the next demo. Another way for you to get data or communicate to the user is through push notifications, and this is kind of hard to demonstrate. I've put together a demo that's based on the training kit that you can download from the developer portal. I'll try to walk through it, but it might not be clear exactly what's going on here because we're running in the emulator and because we're not really running a real service, but at least you'll be able to see it and see some of the code that's required for it. So what happens basically, or the way that you can think about this is, you're building an application and you want to be able to send push notifications to a user running your app on their device. One of the things that you want to do to comply with the certification guidelines is make sure the user opts in. So ask them if they want to accept push notifications, and then if they do, then your Windows Phone 7 application will register itself with your service. So you have a separate service independent of your Windows Phone 7 development. You have a separate service that's keeping track of these registrations, and also it contains the logic for when or what notifications it's going to push down and when. And then your service communicates with Microsoft's push notification service, and then they send the notifications on your behalf to everybody that you have tracked is registered. That's basically how it works. So you're not calling the phone directly through your service. You're passing that through Microsoft. Best practices for this, and it's sort of enforced in code, is don't send a lot of information. You can't guarantee that the notifications are going to be received by the user. Their phone's turned off, or maybe they didn't opt in, or for some other reason it didn't come through. And don't send a lot. Don't send frequently, too frequently, and make sure that they opt in. All right, so this is a really simple demo, except for the push notifications. But web services is really straightforward. So similar to what I did with the previous demo, I'll pull this one up. It's built on the one that we just saw, adding some new code. I'll run it, we'll see it work, and then I'll dig into the code and show you what I was doing. So this one's a little bit different because I need this test client to simulate or to kick off notifications. We'll talk about that in a second. So now I've added a couple new items to my navigation, to my list of navigation. So a new web services page. So this is using a publicly available, hopefully up right now, dictionary service where you can type in a word and get the definition. Oh man, I forgot to share my desktop. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, same application with new stuff added to it, including web services. I'm going to put a breakpoint in our web services page so that we can see what's going on in the code behind. I'll kind of do it both at the same time. So we've got a button click that's going to kick off the web service call, and then we've got a handler for the completed event. I've added a service reference, the same as you would do in Silverlight or in WPF, and that's created a proxy class for me that I can hook into the completed event and call the defined web method. A handy tip here for debugging and stuff in the emulator. If you hit the pause button on your keyboard, I think, yeah, it's not working now. I thought it was the pause. Wait aside, yeah, there it goes. So you see when I did that, this dropped down with an EN. That's the current culture. You can then use the keyboard to type in instead of having to move your mouse and push all the buttons on the on-screen keyboard. You don't get the keyboard events that you get when you use the on-screen keyboard. So if you're looking at text change or check-in key press events, you'll still have to use the on-screen. All right, so now it just does a quick check to make sure that it has something before it creates a new proxy and then calls the define method, passing that in. Hopefully it'll receive a response. Yeah, so there's the response. We don't have an error, so we know that for each of these definitions, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just creating a new list box item with the definition. So I'm just going to F5 through that. We can see there's the results of our web service call. So that's not blocking the UI thread while you do that. The completed event is returning on the UI thread, so you don't need to marshal the result back like you need to do with HTTP web request and response. So all you have to do is just handle the result and do what you want with it. In this case, you might want to throw it into your view model, but just for the demo, I've just created new items. Okay, second. So nothing special there. That's just a plain old ASMX service that I just connected to like anything else and consumed the same way that I would in Silverlight. Nothing new. Push notifications is a little new, and I think I'm going to do that again. So no, I won't. So we've got active clients. We can see that we have one. Our test client that's running our registration service recognizes that somebody just said that I care about receiving push notifications. You can also see back here in our Windows Phone application that we've successfully registered. So now I can use this test client to simulate whatever logic you would be running to determine that it's time to send push notifications to whoever cares and what you're going to send. So I'm going to send that, and then we'll see back here that I've got text that just shows the raw notification. So this is while the application is running. It's similar when the application is not, to be able to do things like update a badge count on the live tile that's on your that if you were to pin to the start menu, could update your badge count, that would be here, and that can be whatever, like how many unread messages you have or, whatever. You can also change the background image, and you can give the user a toast notification. For example, so-and-so has updated their status or commented on your status or something like that. So those are notifications that can happen. The tile is something that happens when your application is not active. The toast is something that can happen in either case, whether your application is active or while it's or not. and then a raw notification is just sending something in some format that the application is going to know how to decode to do whatever you want with. And that's the example that I gave here. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that. I don't know how much sense this is going to make, and I don't want to spend too long on it, but I'll try to hit the key points. So one of the key points is the registration service. So this is the service that you're going to be creating that's going to handle requests from devices to say that they care about receiving push notifications. So that's your register and unregister. This method gets called by the phone. So we can see that in our XAML. Subscribe to service. So we've got our local test client that's using that localhost URI, calling the register method. That URI that gets called to it, let's just follow that. Where's that? That's the channel. I lost where that went. There's your channel. Based on a name. So what that'll do is that'll build a unique URI that is the location of the Microsoft push notification service along with the key that represents your device. So that's what goes to the registration service, and that is just responsible for keeping track of a list of URIs. Next, so this is our test client. What happens when you click the button? So we've got a registration service. We've got the phone talking to our registration service to say that I want to receive push notifications. Now we have the test client saying, okay, it's time to send a notification. So we get a list of subscribers from our service and then use a helper class to send the raw notification. So this is a raw notification, not tile or toast. So we're just building basically a string message from our text box and passing it off to this helper to build the notification. So that has to be in a certain format, and it has to be in a specific format. So we go to notification by type, which follows down through to send message. So what we have is a list of our subscribers that's passed in for each one of those send notification. So that is, under the hood, it's really just doing an HTTP web request to that URI, which is to the Microsoft push notification service with the device ID, and then it takes it from there. So so that's really basic push notification. That's raw message push notifications. If you want to look into it more, this is taken from, built from the Windows Phone 7 training kit that you can download from the developer portal, and that walks you through the other types of notifications and gives you a full document that walks through what push notifications is all about. Okay, we're about 15 minutes from the end. I think we're in good shape for content. Okay, the last section here. Some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this last section is really easy. So if you got a good foundation in Silverlight, this is all just really simple APIs to do some extra stuff that pertains to Windows Phone 7 application development. One of those is the idea that you can build your application so that users can download it and try it for free before they buy it. I don't know how many times you've gone to the App Store and downloaded an app for 99 cents and you go to use it and you realize it's not what you thought, or maybe you paid a few bucks. And it's not what you thought, and now you're kind of stuck. This gives you a way to make it a little bit less risky for the users to try out your app, see if they like it, and then upgrade when they realize that they do. So what you can do is you can identify certain features of your application. So the implementation of this is totally up to you outside of just identifying what is available in the free version and what's locked down to users who have bought it. So you can do something like you encounter the page that is something that you want to be available to paid users. On page load, check to see if it's a trial. If it's a trial, show one UI that gives them the ability to buy it, or else show the real UI that's the full version. So that's as simple as just checking current license.isTrial. Another thing that's specific to mobile devices are the sensors, so accessing GPS and other sensors, and being able to do that from within your application. With version 1, what we've got coming out is access to approximate GPS for determining your location, real accurate location, and the accelerometer, which detects the orientation of the device. So there are other sensors that probably will be available in the future, compass, light, and proximity, but those are the two that you have to work with currently. So what we'll do is we'll walk through location services. So your application needs to know where you are. I don't know if you want to pinpoint your location on the map, or for whatever reason you need to know where the user is. Simple way to do that is to use the system.device.location namespace, use a geo-coordinate watcher, I'll walk through in the demo, to get your current location. And the device has the ability to return your location at different levels of accuracy, GPS being the highest, the most accurate, and cell radio being the least. Also, the more accurate a location you're looking for, the more power you're going to consume, and also maybe the longer that it will take to get that location. So GPS takes a little bit of time, but it is much more accurate than cell radio, uses a lot more power than cell radio, which is not a lot of power and can return your location a lot faster. The API for this is really simple. When you create your watcher, you just tell it what level of granularity you want for the location, and then underneath the system will determine which one of those three systems to use. In addition to that, there are system applications or other pieces of the phone that you might want to, other areas of the phone that you might want to get into, such as the camera or the user's photo library or contacts. You might want to let the user pick a list of contacts to send some sort of share something with a list of people, make a phone call, browse the web, access the maps, et cetera. So that idea of stepping out to other applications is implemented through launchers and choosers. Launchers basically just step out of your app and activate this system application, passing it maybe some parameters, like a URL, for example, if you want to launch a web browser. And choosers let you step out temporarily to an application and get some data and then return that back to your application. So getting a list of contacts, for example. And it is also important to note, again, you're running on a phone and it's not multitasking. So when you step out to a third-party application, you're deactivating your application. So that tombstoning thing comes in again. It's an important thing to note. So here's a list of launchers and choosers. So map, marketplace, media player, et cetera, and access to the phone. So some of this stuff and we'll see in the demo, some of this stuff you don't have ready access to and can't really develop and troubleshoot in the emulator. You need a real device to do it. And even then, in some cases, it needs to be set up a certain way in order for you to do it. So when we do the location, it's not a launcher or a chooser, but it's a system service. The location service doesn't run in the emulator, but I'll show you the code for how to set it up. So this is the last demo, and I did it again. Make sure that I share my desktop so you guys can see what I'm doing instead of just listening to me. So I've got a separate demo that builds on what we've done so far. I've added a couple of new menu items to our panorama page. And when I run this, we have sensors for location services and system apps for launchers and choosers. Let's do the easy one first. So this doesn't even use a page. So when I click this item, it's just going to create a new web browser task pass it off to the web browser with a URL ping, and we can browse the web. So also now we go back, and our application reactivates. So again, it's been loaded twice. If I step out, we still have our state going on. Step back in. Loaded 2 times. So we're recovering from a deactivation. And I'll show you the code for that. That's dead simple. So it's right behind me. Web browser task. So launchers are either called tasks or launchers, it seems. Have a couple parameters. Each task has its own specific parameters. So with the web browser task, you care about the URL that you're going to be showing. And then, so you set those parameters and you just call show. It's that easy. And all the rest of the launchers and choosers work the same way. It's really easy to implement. So for sensors now, what we're doing is, this is the equivalent of our user consent when you're going to access location services. That's something that a user might not be comfortable giving up. So you want them to opt into using location services. So we've got a button click that is basically implicit that says, okay, go ahead and use location services. And we can see here in the emulator that it failed. So this does run on a device, and I think for beta it was returning some New Jersey location like Princeton or something. But with the RTM, it looks like it doesn't work in the emulator, unless maybe there's something that I can set to change that, but I haven't discovered it. So let's see how we did that. So I've got a private member geo-coordinate watcher that I've got defined on my page. When it's loaded, I set it and subscribe to the status changed event. The status that we care about is ready. We're going to go through initializing first. So you're going to, when things are working right, you're going to hit this initializing and then the ready. And then you can read from that your position, which gives you location, longitude, and latitude. From that, then you can step out and call some other service that can give you other information that needs those coordinates, like city, state, and zip, for example. But what we get is not disabled or no data, which is also, the user is opted out, so you're not going to get it. But also, this is the key here too. So you've got your watcher. You want to call try start so that if it fails, you don't get an exception, and give it a time span. Now this is a call that's being made on the UI thread. So if you set that to 10 seconds, for 10 seconds, the UI is going to be unresponsive to the user. So you want to put a short duration in here, and we're just doing a message box.show to let them know if it didn't work. So again, the geo-coordinate watcher and status changed are what you're looking for. Okay, so that's a whirlwind tour of Windows Phone 7. I recommend that you download that training kit that I was referring to, especially if you want more information about push notifications, because it's a kind of a big topic. So recommendations that I can give you on getting started with Windows Phone 7 is to read the app certification guidelines, because even the best, most efficient, clean application could run into trouble if you're not doing something as simple as maybe asking the user for access the location services before you go ahead and do it. Be aware of device limitations like memory and processor speed. So when the app runs in the emulator, it's using the configuration of your laptop or your development machine, which is much faster and has much more memory than the phone will. So test on the device early and often. And as much as possible, adhere to the user interface guidelines and the app certification guidelines, and try not to fight them too much, or else you'll have some trouble in getting certified. So, and also, you run into questions, hit the Windows Phone 7 developer forum. You can always email me at the address that's listed there. And thanks.
Thank you, Robert, for this awesome presentation. We did have a few questions come through, and as just a reminder for everyone to ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar at the top left side of your screen, type your question, then click the Ask button. First question that we had come through was, is basic HTTP binding the only supported binding for WCF?
That's what they're saying, yeah. I think that I was able to, it might have been on beta, I was able to use a custom binding. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but just to be safe, basic HTTP binding is what's supported.
Great, thank you. The second question that came through was, is there a push notification template available besides the offline WP7 training kit? Sorry.
Not that I've seen, and yeah, not that I've seen. That's your best. What that is it's a pretty complete example of all of the different types of notifications you can send, as well as the package. There's probably some documentation on MSDN for the format of the message that needs to be sent through the service. But that thing in that example in the training kit is the best one that I've found so far.
Great, thank you. What are the options we can set for the emulator?
Options like how? I'm not sure what you mean.
If you'd like, I think you can type back in more information. I'll come right back to it.
Yeah.
Another question we had is, when do you recommend using Expression Blend with Visual Studio 2010?
Whenever you want. The design surface in Visual Studio 2010 is much better than it was in previous versions, but it still has some limitations. And if you really want control over your layout, so I guess the short answer is, especially when you're doing your layout, you can easily right-click on any page and open an Expression Blend and handle modifying your layout in Blend. It's a better tool for that. And it's really meant for that layout and design.
Thank you. That sounds very helpful. Okay, more on the emulator question. Are there any settings we can configure, like location, date, time, and language?
I don't think so. Let's have a look. So it's limited. It's limited to theme, date, time, which is set automatically, 24-hour clock. Very limited. The stuff that you can customize is right here. I've seen some posts about how to unlock the emulator, but I don't know if that's something that I would recommend, and I don't know if I don't know if I should be recommending that.
Thank you, Robert. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them in at this time. In the meantime, I'm going to click through a few polling questions, and we greatly appreciate your feedback. The first question, was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? Give it a couple more seconds. All right, thank you. The second question, please rate the presentation content, excellent, good, or poor. Give it a few more seconds. Great, thank you. Last question, would you like us to schedule a follow-up, yes or no? Give it a few more seconds. All right, thank you. It does seem we did have one more question come through. Any problem with installing the kit after installing Visual Studio 2010 or installing just the kit?
Not with the RTM. With previous versions, with some Silverlight tools installed, the installer could hang, but it seems like they got that straight with the installation. So I've done it both without Visual Studio installed on a fresh machine, and with my existing Visual Studio 2010 installation in place, along with all of its customization, and it seems to be pretty straightforward.
Great, thank you. If there are no further questions, we'd like to thank Robert again for the wonderful presentation. This webcast is a part of our mobility series. The next webcast in the series, Windows Phone 7 and Your Business, will take place on November 30th. We'll be forwarding out the recorded version of this presentation when it becomes available, along with more information on the November 30th webcast. Did you have another question come through? Oh, yes, we will be sending out the recording. If you have any further questions about this presentation, please feel free to email Robert at the email address provided on the slide. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. You are now free to disconnect. Thank you.